Hi, my name is Megan Merritt, and for my final research project, I've prepared to show how the application of the ADDIE model of systematic instructional design process can have a positive impact on organizational level results. I plan to use my own organization as an example and show how we recently implemented the ADDIE model to create a training program that would help address an organizational problem. My research will include an in-depth overview of the steps in the ADDIE model and the various options organizations should consider when investing time and money into any staff training. The overall goal in any training effort is to change or improve employee behavior, usually because of a knowledge or skills gap, changes in organizational processes, or performance problems. However, many training programs end up being retired shortly after they were created because they're deemed as ineffective or not worth the time and resources. I work for the YMCA of Western North Carolina, and like so many other organizations, we struggle with creating cost-effective trainings that actually achieve long-term behavioral or cultural change. I believe it's because we are often rushed in the process and don't conduct a formal needs analysis, establish clear training objectives, or conduct proper evaluation. Today, I'll give you an overview of what the ADDIE model is, its 5 steps and supporting evidence, and an example of implementation of the ADDIE model, including an example of gap analysis, a real-life application of each step in the process, and the overall impact on my organizational results. I'll also provide a summary of best practices and what we are doing after applying the ADDIE model at my organization. The YMCA of Western North Carolina is championing charitable work in our community, including drowning prevention programs, nutrition programs, chronic disease prevention, child care for low-income families, and much more. The organization has a constant need to raise funds for its charitable work and has a history of growing its annual campaign until recently. The past 3 years have been a struggle to retain donors and grow the amount of funds needed to sustain the work. In order to improve our ability to raise funds, we revamped our donor engagement strategy and needed to develop a training for employees to help implement this new strategy. Upon applying the ADDIE model, we're experiencing positive results for the organization. My research will walk through the 5 steps of the ADDIE model in detail, providing real-life application with a nonprofit organization. There is not one specific universal approach to the training design process, but most are generally described as a systematic approach for developing training programs that includes approximately 5 steps, often referred to as the ADDIE model: assessment, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. The first step is conducting a needs assessment. Usually the need is obvious and presents itself because the employees show a lack of knowledge in a particular area or skill set. If everyone's doing a great job and the strategy for the business is being executed well, then it's hard to establish a need for training. Step 1 also includes ensuring that employees are ready for training. This means that even though an employee or group of employees might need training, if they're not willing to invest the time or the energy to improve, then training would be a waste of time. This would require a basic assessment of attitude, motivation, and ability to comprehend the training content. Christy Loescher, a professor at the University of Texas, discusses elements of effective training programs in her 2006 article in Employee Relations Today. She specifies that if training is not supported and reinforced by organizational and corporate culture, then training may actually do more harm than good. For instance, requiring employees to attend a class that outlines behavior expectations and standards, which they then see flaunted by peers who are promoted, will create a level of distrust, cynicism, and dissatisfaction. Conducting a needs and attitude assessment will help the company get an idea of where their organizational culture is at in regards to being ready for training. Step 2 is to design and create a learning environment conducive to master the training topic. This includes both the physical space and thoughtful planning of the material and curriculum, often referred to as the third development step. Several trainings are unsuccessful because they do not give enough time and attention to this step. Perhaps an outdated curriculum is used, or the trainer is not effective at engagement. Creating a community of learning requires practice and feedback to determine the most effective environment. Companies might default to selecting a trainer based on the time served with the organization and not necessarily consider whether or not that trainer has the ability to facilitate the material in an engaging manner. Loescher states that consciously or unconsciously, business owners reflect their own beliefs about the company they are building in the characteristics of people they hire to train their staff. This selection can be a powerful tool if those selected to train have the ability to define and drive the cultural environment that's desired. However, if the senior leadership of a sales company, for example, only cares about creating winning outcomes or rewarding top salespeople with no regard for how those sales were achieved, then the focus in training will inevitably be on the bottom line with no regard to how that target is reached. Now that the goals of the training are laid out and the desired results are identified, implementation of the design will require identifying the best method to achieve those results. Usually, it's either a traditional in-person classroom-style training or perhaps an e-learning online training. It could also be a hybrid of both. For example, there might be e-learnings before or after a live in-person session to reinforce learning. The selection would depend on the desired goals from the needs assessment. For example, are you desiring discussion and feedback or simply a skills transfer? If the end result is to have strong communication among the team members, then an in-person training might be best. However, if you simply need your employees to digest knowledge and feedback is not necessary for skills to transfer, then an e-learning or webinar might suffice. The physical environment is also important to consider when setting up training. Asking car mechanics to watch a video or PowerPoint presentation might not be as effective as holding the training in a mechanic's shop where they can get hands-on experience using the tools they would need to practice with. Likewise, a busy mechanic shop would not be an ideal place for a training on, say, healthcare management. A training environment should be comfortable, appropriate space for the size of the group, and generally supportive of the transfer of knowledge. Implementation includes creating objectives so that the participants and trainer can identify if they have accomplished the goals of the training upon completion. Loescher says that this is the most important characteristic of training design. They focus on how goals are achieved as well as what goals are achieved. This part of training development involves getting the trainee to understand how to manage skill improvement or apply the content to their jobs. This obviously works best if the company encourages coworker and leadership support. Identifying the purpose and benefit of going through the training will help employees buy into the process and encourage their development. Evaluation is essential to know if the training was well received and effective. If not, the training might need some adjustment or changes. It's crucial to keep evaluating over time, even if the training has been effective for years. As your audience changes, your goals and structure may need to adjust to better suit their needs. In my opinion, this step is the most important, and one that often gets overlooked. Anyone can see a need for training and implement what they perceive to be the best strategy, but if you do not seek feedback and proper evaluation, you never actually know if your efforts have been truly effective. There are 4 major phases in the training evaluation process. The Kirkpatrick model has become the industry standard and breaks down training into these 4 levels: reaction, learning, behavior, and results. The first phase of the training evaluation process is described as reaction, or the degree to which participants find the training favorable, engaging, and relevant. This might also be called attitude or needs assessment. This first phase should determine if the training is in fact the best solution to a given problem. Sometimes managers might assume that training is needed if there's a lack of knowledge, such as not being able to properly build a piece of equipment or pack a product. However, if there's no improvement after training occurs, there may be a different issue, such as the need to redesign workflow. Learning is the second phase of training evaluation and involves both training design and implementation. This can be described as the degree to which participants acquire the intended knowledge, skills, attitude, confidence, or commitment. The amount of learning depends on the readiness of employees to train, determined in Phase 1, and the type of training offered. Choosing an effective training design based on the intended audience and objectives desired will have a high degree of influence on its success. For instance, training car mechanics how to install a car battery without being anywhere near a car or battery would dramatically impact the knowledge and skills acquired. Designing effective training includes close attention to choosing appropriate trainers, establishing an environment conducive to the learning topic, lesson design and delivery, and the level of support from leadership. The third phase of training evaluation process can be described as behavior, or the level of which participants apply what they learned in training when they're back on the job. The effectiveness of training can often be seen quickly if employee behavior changes after training, such as the ability to install a car battery effectively after being trained how to do so. If an employee does not apply the acquired knowledge, one can easily conclude that either the employee did not learn from the training or the training did not address the actual problem. Companies invest in training because they hope it creates positive change for the organization. This might occur in the form of human resource outcomes like attitudes and motivation, organizational performance such as less turnover or increased productivity, or financial profit. The last overall phase of the training evaluation process is often referred to as results, or an analysis of targeted outcomes for the organization. This is different from behavior change in the third phase because employee behavior can change as a result of training, such as installing a car battery, but not have the intended effect on the organization overall, such as perhaps to sell more car battery installations. In this phase, a company can use several methods to determine if the desired outcomes were met, and if they could be met more efficiently or with greater return on investment. Some of these methods include comparing outcomes pre- and post-training, analysis of data collected, organizational survey results, and calculating return on investment, or ROI. The information found during this phase will often determine if a training program needs to be kept as is, modified, or eliminated. Loescher reiterates that training is not a one-time event. It should be an ongoing process to shape behavior over the long term. A company's commitment to learning is demonstrated by ongoing discussions and training. Corporate culture can provide long-term support for training by communicating what's expected and offering the opportunity for achievement or advancement based on training accomplishments. So ultimately, training should not be viewed as a one-size-fits-all approach, but a customized experience for each individual. The YMCA of Western North Carolina has been championing charitable work in our community for the past 128 years. The organization has a constant need to raise funds for its charitable work and has a history of growing its annual campaign until recently. The past 3 years have been a struggle to retain donors and grow the amount of funds needed to sustain the work. My hypothesis of the underlying issues causing this problem is lack of adequate training for staff and volunteers. This is a problem, obviously, because it limits our ability to expand our charitable work. And it also is discouraging for staff and volunteers who know that we have the potential but cannot seem to translate that into the resources needed to grow our impact. There's no question that the YMCA is having a positive impact on children, youth, and families all over the world. The YMCA is a household name. But unfortunately, we're not recognized very highly when it comes to charitable organizations. In fact, the YMCA of the USA is ranked as the nation's 5th largest charity, but according to Charity Navigator, the YMCA is not even listed in their top 10 most frequently viewed charities. I believe that we could be doing considerably more and that it's up to the staff and volunteers of the YMCA to make that happen. Beyond the resources it requires to build and maintain its facilities, we must expand our reach to low-income communities so that we can serve children and families that ordinarily would never get to come into a YMCA facility. Brian Weber of Donor by Design Group, a popular philanthropy resource for YMCAs, states with almost 1 million charities in the U.S., the YMCA must do better to rise above the clutter and make its case for support to attract the resources it requires. It needs to build on the success it's had working with major donors, corporations, and foundations to work together on developing sustainable solutions that address the increasingly complex health and social challenges our communities face. Unfortunately, however, the task of raising money and executing a successful campaign is often thought to be on the shoulders of the development department. Not many people I know wake up every day with a strong desire to go out and ask people for money. Even if we have a brilliant strategy for connecting donors with our work, the employees and volunteers of the YMCA will be called upon in the implementation of these plans to encourage more donors on our promises with their financial support and deliver on those promises. So to do so, we will need training, tools, and check-ins along the way to ensure that we're building an organizational structure that supports our fundraising goals. The YMCA has 3 C-suite executives, 1 CEO, CFO, and COO, as well as an executive director for each of its locations. The strategy is driven by the CEO and the board of directors, but the CFO and COO outline the specific details of how that strategy is to be achieved. In this way, they set the structure to achieve the overall mission. If their structure lacks clarity or does not produce the intended results, the strategic direction becomes difficult to translate to the executive directors and all of their direct reports. Freeman specifically mentions the role of top-level leadership is critical to organizational change efforts. The impact that this can have on our philanthropy strategy is fairly obvious and has existed for several years. We rely on a small core group of full-time leadership staff to not only supervise and operate the YMCA facilities, but also engage donors in their communities and raise all the funds necessary to support their charitable programs. There has not been a consistent philanthropic strategy, nor any training specifically geared towards fundraising expectations for staff, who often have little experience cultivating donors. To complicate matters, the senior leadership team has tried several donor software programs over the past 4 years, which has made it difficult for staff to implement the strategy. Every time we become familiar with the process, it changes. The result of these complications is not surprising. Our YMCA has not had a successful annual campaign for the past 3 years. In an effort to ensure well-developed and sustainable training solutions, I conducted a needs assessment to confirm the root causes of this fundraising issue and ensure that staff were actually ready to participate in a training program. In this case, a few research methods were helpful, including a review of the quantifiable fundraising data for the past several years. Having at least 5 years of numerical data on the amount raised in the YMCA's annual campaign would help decipher which years have been better than others. This will be valuable to compare to any significant shifts in strategy or software over the years and see if either of those factors aligned with any philanthropy trends. We also implemented a focus group interview with the development team, which revealed perspectives on their difficulties over the past few years. The staff structure of the development team has evolved itself over the past 2 years, so the perspectives from the veteran staff that have been there 5 years or more provided valuable insight into the rationale behind any shifts, especially in the back-end processes and why that may have affected the dollar amount raised. This was somewhat qualitative data, but was helpful to explain the story behind the quantitative data. Another aspect of assessment that provided much insight was interviews with the current staff, both full-time and part-time, and from various levels of leadership. This allowed me to gauge their insight on what challenges they face when fundraising. Hearing from those who experience barriers on a day-to-day basis provided rich, quality information on the varying reasons. Collecting these statements and putting the responses into themes or categories assisted me and my leadership team in determining the most common reasons and focusing solutions on the issues that the organization can change or have impact on. Part of the needs assessment includes a review of the data, specifically the amount raised in the annual campaign for the past 5 years. While you can see here the amount raised over the past several years is respectable and shows consistent growth, the annual goal has not been achieved since 2014. After further discussion with the development team, the veteran staff seem to believe that this gap is due to the leadership shift that happened between 2014 and 2016. The organization shifted from 1 vice president to 5 vice presidents in 2014, and then, just 2 years later, reverted back to 2 vice presidents. The development department also changed leadership twice during this 2-year period. With that amount of turnover, many senior leadership staff expressed feeling pulled in multiple directions, especially with the 5 vice president structure. The CEO publicly acknowledged that this unique leadership structure that he tried did not work and set the organization back significantly. The development team also reported some complications when they revised the donor stewardship process in 2014. Not only did the development department experience its own leadership transition, they also continued to change management software programs. While it was a much needed transition to change software, none of the development staff had experience with the new software, and so they decided that it might be beneficial to keep both while they learned the new one. And while this might seem like a feasible solution, it actually just created twice the work because everything needed double entry. So it created frustration for the employees who were trying to use the new software and the employees that were trying to double enter all of the data. So these results show that there certainly was a lack of clear stewardship strategy from the senior leadership team. There's also a knowledge gap around the process of donor stewardship for all staff, and a lack of training around how to execute the overall philanthropy strategy. Implementation of training would force the senior leadership team to clarify the strategy, map out the various expectations for staff, and educate them on the tools that they have in order to fulfill those expectations. It would also encourage teamwork rather than an individualized approach to meeting the campaign goal, which should yield more dollars raised overall. The training design process required not only the data on the root of the knowledge or skills gap, but also feedback from senior leaders on what role the staff are expected to play in implementing the philanthropic strategy. It will also require a review of which staff should attend this particular training, which could be determined by defining which levels of staff require financial development as a competency necessary to their job. The task analysis would consist of determining the actions required to effectively utilize the new donor software and supervisor support for ensuring access and understanding of that software. Design of the training requires us to determine what success looks like and determine the exact objectives for this philanthropy training. They include increased knowledge of the overall philanthropy strategy of the organization, increasing the comfort level of staff to develop relationships with donors, implementing consistent tools and resources to execute the strategy, and ultimately increasing donations from donors. The training program will educate staff on the strategy by explaining the rationale behind the focus of cultivating relationships with major donors. The intent will be to shift the focus from hosting a multitude of fundraising events to driving a strategy of engagement with support from senior leaders with consistent tools. After input from senior leaders determining the resources available to put this training together, it was determined that the audience of this training will be full-time staff at the YMCA of Western North Carolina, and the length of the course will be 3 hours of in-person training. Research from Capice and Kempinski in Behavior and Information Technology shows e-learning to be just as effective as in-person training when tailored to a specific learning style and much less expensive. However, while an electronic or virtual training format might save on time and expense of bringing staff together, a complex issue like this on a strategic level that has not had clear support from senior leadership will be more effective conducted in person, at least until the strategy becomes part of the culture and better understood. There will be pre-work, which is an assigned list of donors that staff will bring to the training course, and an electronic survey conducted upon completion of training to gain feedback on effectiveness. As you can see on these graphs, approximately 2% of the YMCA's donors provide over 74% of the income raised in the annual campaign of the YMCA. We also know that 93% of past donors will give again if asked in person, and 64% will give more if they're kept informed of the impact that their donation has. So the philanthropy strategy of the YMCA is relationship-based. The time and effort from staff and volunteers should have an intentional focus on the top 10% of existing donors. If we focus on them, it should yield a higher dollar amount raised, rather than spending the same amount of time and energy on trying to obtain new donors. Staff training will need to include implementing an operational plan of cultivating this top 10% of donors year-round and deepening their engagement with the YMCA's charitable work. Relationship-based annual campaigns have shown much success, especially when led by young professionals. A study conducted by Rutledge University proves that student-led campaigns are on the rise due to their success at increasing student scholarship support to reduce student debt, engaging students and faculty in having a lasting impact on students, and encouraging sustained philanthropic giving. The results of shifting the culture of fundraising to a relationship-based strategy, accompanied with support from senior leadership, was incredible. The average gift tripled, and the university surpassed their campaign goal by 36%. Ohio State University developed 5 recommendations to organizations designing a training course to cultivate philanthropic outcomes. Those recommendations include planning in collaboration with senior leaders, defining outcomes, explaining the rationale with research, designing class activities that include interaction with senior leaders, and conducting evaluation. The development of this philanthropy training will implement those recommendations. The design of training will be a collaborative process with input from senior leaders and will consist of 3 major sections, approximately an hour each. The first section will provide an overview of the different methods the YMCA uses to support its charitable work and the importance of the YMCA's annual campaign. The second section will include an overview of the new philanthropy strategy and defined clarification of staff expectations within the strategy. The third section will function as a small group working session where participants will break up into teams and brainstorm how to execute the strategy, make a plan, and then report back what additional tools they might need to be successful. The facilitators should include senior leaders from the development department and C-suite executives to reinforce the commitment to the strategy. This training should be conducted annually in the late summer or early fall of the calendar year. The YMCA's annual campaign kicks off in October with the staff and board phase and concludes with the community phase by mid-April. By having the training prior to the kickoff, it'll give staff a chance to use their engagement tools for donor stewardship prior to asking donors to renew their gift. Since this training is new, all current full-time staff should take the training immediately, and then annual training opportunities should be focused on any new full-time staff. The program should be scheduled and marketed to full-time staff by the Development and Human Resources departments. Communication regarding training should be conducted in multiple methods, such as a staff newsletter, calendar, emails, etc., to ensure that staff are aware of the importance of training, and the pre-work assignment to complete before attending. Reinforcement of the training being mandatory for full-time staff should be offered by senior leadership to ensure accountability. A roster of who has taken the training should be kept on file by Human Resources, and any full-time staff who do not attend should be reported to senior leadership. Evaluation for this program will include an electronic survey that is emailed out to participants within 2 days of training to capture their immediate reactions and potential learnings. The survey results will be reviewed by the instructors and the development team to evaluate any changes or adjustments that need to be made in order to achieve the intended results. The survey questions will ask for short answer responses to questions such as, what information did you take away as most helpful from this training? And what elements of training should be edited or eliminated because they were not helpful? Another level of evaluation to be used with this training program is to evaluate behavior and results. If employees are deepening relationships with donors, their behavior towards fundraising should shift to be one of positivity rather than dread. Supervisors should be able to report progress around stewardship and demonstrate confidence in the philanthropy strategy. Lastly, increasing the amount of funds raised in the YMCA's annual campaign would be a result that the development department and senior leadership team would monitor regularly to prove return on investment. Senior leadership could calculate the cost of offering training to the staff, including hourly wages for staff and instructors, materials, and supplies, and then compare that to the percentage of campaign dollars increased every year to determine if the training directly correlates to an increase of funds raised. Other metrics could be monitored as well and might include the number of new donors, donor retention, or increased gifts to see what other positive indicators may be occurring as a result. The staff of the YMCA are committed to strengthening the foundations of community through programming that builds support for youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. We've grown significantly since 1889, and in order to continue to grow the impact that we want to have with our charitable programs, we must educate and empower our staff with the knowledge and tools to increase the financial resources necessary to do so. This research project and training program is not just a theory. I've had the blessing and support of my senior leadership team to conduct this research, design the training program, and implement it among our full-time staff at the YMCA this year. While we're still in the implementation phase, the process has greatly impacted my own professional development, and I'm confident that it will dramatically benefit our organization. I believe in training, and any time that we put people first, we put them in a position to succeed. Thank you so much for joining me today. On the next slides, you'll see a brief overview of the philanthropy training lesson plan document that goes over the 3 blocks of training and follows up with references. So here you see an overview of the lesson plan document, the description of the training, and the first hour is really just an overview of stewardship with the YMCA, the history and the structure, and their key roles in our annual campaign. We want to emphasize our strong need to raise funds, that we want it to be a rewarding experience for everyone involved, and that our strategy is really to cultivate a culture of philanthropy year round. The second hour of the training is when we'll introduce this new strategy around their list of assigned prospects. So their pre-work that they'll bring to the training will come into play, and we'll be able to explore the different software and engagement tools that we have built into this new strategy and clarify how we want them to use those as connection points. The last hour of the training is really meant to be a workshop session for them to build their case for support. There'll be some role play and a chance to plan how they're actually going to ask those donors to renew or increase their gifts. After the training, we'll follow up with not only evaluation components, but also a chance to really share success stories and check back in with them to hold them accountable and build momentum as we drive this new strategy. Thank you again for joining me today on this real-life application of the ADDIE model.